The white light was so intense that Vale's third eye clamped shut. The testing facility's central dome was illuminated by 400 artificial suns, and every single one felt like it was searing his scales. He was at Dravosi, the primary testing administrator of the Class 9 survival drill. But even up here, behind the heavily shielded observation glass, the ambient thermal radiation was physically oppressive. The air tasted like scorched copper. It was a simple, brutal metric of the academy. 47 top-tier cadets had walked into that heavily reinforced chamber this cycle. 47 had failed. 12 were currently submerged in the intensive regeneration ward, their internal cooling systems completely ruptured. Then she arrived. She was just a little girl. That was all. 5 feet 4 inches of unremarkable soft-tissue mammalian biology. Her dark hair was tied back with a torn, frayed strip of gray fabric. Her standard-issue cadet uniform had been crudely modified, bulging with unauthorized hand-stitched pockets that ruined the pristine military silhouette. While the Corvin Pack administrators stood at the primary consoles calibrating the lethality metrics, she sat quietly in the holding area. She wasn't reviewing the survival schematics. She was calmly dragging a small, primitive sliver of metal across a wet sharpening stone. Vale magnified the optical sensors focused on her hands. It was a steel sewing needle, a generational tool inherited from her planetary elders, listed on her intake logistics form. She had brought it for emergencies. "Is there a water fountain nearby?" she asked without even looking up from the steady rhythm of the sharpening stone. "The air feels thick." The Corvin shift leader's respiratory slits flared in dark amusement. The drill hadn't even begun, and the human was already complaining about the ambient humidity. Vale anticipated a 30-second failure. They all did. Have you ever watched a perfect lethal system realize it is entirely obsolete? Or seen an apex species slowly understand they are outmatched? Keep your eyes on the chamber. The heavy atmospheric airlock cycled shut. The locking bolts slammed into place, sealing her inside the simulated environment. Phase 1 initiated. Instantly, the environmental regulators injected pressurized dry heat. The atmospheric scrubbers screamed as the chamber spiked to 80 degrees Celsius. This was the exact threshold where previous cadets' internal organs began to shut down, prompting the automated medevac harnesses to deploy. Vale leaned over the main console. The biometric scanners flashed green, which meant the sensors were completely fried. Or, no, the central AI didn't make mistakes. A warning rune materialized across his holographic display. Subject core temperature exceeds safe parameters. The alert wasn't flashing red for critical biological failure. It was flashing a steady, pulsing yellow, a code for anomalous endurance. Beside him, the 3 Corvin administrators abruptly stopped working. Their species relied on a subconscious synchronized pack rhythm to operate the complex testing consoles. Now one stepped left while another froze. Their armored shoulders collided with a dull thud. The pack link had physically broken. Down in the crucible, the human wasn't collapsing. She wasn't even running. At a slow, deliberate pace, she stood in the center of the unbearable heat, analyzing the thermal distortion waves rippling off the floor grates. Instead of seeking the center of the room, she moved toward the curved perimeter walls. She traced the subtle, almost microscopic air currents flowing from the ventilation intakes. She was actively mapping the atmospheric convection, finding microscopic cool pockets in an environment scientifically designed to possess none. The Culvine shift leader tapped the glass. His segmented fingers left thick condensation prints on the barrier. His secondary eyelids blinked rapidly, a sign of severe cognitive dissonance. Their environmental senses dictated a uniform, inescapable 80 degrees Celsius. Yet she was navigating the heat like it was a mild inconvenience, stepping precisely where the air was a fraction of a degree cooler. Then Phase 2 activated. The intense lighting shifted from blinding white to a sickly luminescent green. The vents overhead clicked open. They dumped a concentrated aerosolized neurotoxin directly into the contained atmosphere. It was a synthetic paralytic, designed to test a cadet's pure adrenaline response and their absolute speed in deploying an emergency rebreather. The human didn't reach for her rebreather. She stopped walking. She tilted her head back, flared her small nostrils, and inhaled deeply. Vale's primary heart stalled in his chest. He reached for the manual override lever, fully intending to flood the room with emergency counteragents before her nervous system liquefied. Before his fingers could grasp the metal handle, she sneezed once, twice. Then she resumed walking. She began producing a rhythmic, low-frequency vibration from the back of her throat. She was humming. The medical team's primary alarms triggered. The sirens howled through the observation deck, a deafening screech, expecting immediate cardiac arrest. 3 seconds later, the alarms abruptly silenced themselves. The medical AI had automatically recalibrated its own baseline. Her internal vitals showed absolutely no chemical stress. She had smelled a weaponized compound, biologically processed it as a mild respiratory irritant, and simply ignored it. Down in the chamber, the green toxic fog swirled heavily around her boots. She kept humming, her bare fingers idly tracing the sharp outline of the steel needle resting inside her pocket. A low mechanical groan echoed through the testing facility. The atmospheric regulators violently reversed their flow. The heavy toxic air was ripped from the chamber, plunging the closed environment into a near vacuum. The temperature plummeted alongside the pressure. Ice crystals bloomed instantly across the reinforced observation glass. This was the endurance check, the phase where cadets typically lost consciousness from rapid depressurization within 90 seconds. Rhea did not panic. She simply slowed her breathing. But the extreme pressure differential caught the crude, hand-stitched pocket of her uniform. The fabric strained against a jagged environmental simulation rock. A sharp hiss pierced the silence. A microtear had opened in her protective outer layer. Oxygen began bleeding into the void. Vale watched the monitors, fully expecting the automated surrender protocol to trigger. Instead, the human reached into her pocket. She withdrew the primitive steel sewing needle. In an environment devoid of atmospheric pressure, surrounded by lethally dropping temperatures, she calmly unwound the frayed strip of gray fabric from her hair. She threaded the microscopic eye of the metal tool. Her hands did not shake. She pinched the edges of the torn polymer suit together and physically stitched the breach closed. During the precise manipulation, the sharp steel slipped. It pricked the pad of her bare index finger. A single bead of bright red blood welled up, bubbling in the low-pressure environment. Vale magnified the optical feed to maximum resolution. He expected to see the fluid boil away or instantly freeze. What he saw defied all documented galactic biology. The edges of the microscopic wound actively pulled themselves together. The cellular platelets clotted and sealed the breach in real time, closing the injury right before his eyes. Her fragile biological vessel was a self-repairing machine. The heavy airlock seals disengaged with a final echoing clunk. Total elapsed time inside the crucible was 11 minutes. The historical average for failure was 47 minutes. The historical success rate was 0. Rhea pulled her environmental collar down, exposing her pale neck to the newly pressurized air. Is there a harder version? This felt like Tuesday weather. Before the administrators could even process the casual dismissal, she reached into a different modified pocket. She retrieved a dense brown rectangular block wrapped in thin metallic foil. "Emergency food," she muttered as she tore the foil open with her blunt teeth. It was earth chocolate. The exact moment the dense alkaloid-heavy scent of roasted cocoa and crystallized sucrose hit the ventilation scrubbers, absolute chaos erupted. The environmental sensors identified the complex chemical signature as a highly toxic biological hazard. Warning sirens blared. 3 separate species on the observation deck violently gagged, their sensitive olfactory receptors burning from the intense aroma. The Corvin shift leader slammed his massive fist onto the emergency evacuation button, physically retreating from the glass. Down below, she simply took another bite. When the shift leader finally pulled the deeply classified biological codex for Deathworld Type 3, the data cascading across the holographic display did not describe a standard humanoid species. Instead, it described an apex environmental persistence predator built entirely on mechanical violence. Vale stared at the glowing runes. The Phase 2 anomaly finally made absolute sense. Human physiological operational variance spanned from -40 degrees Celsius to +40 degrees Celsius standard. That was an 80-degree survival range. The galactic norm was only 5 degrees. She hadn't been resisting the Phase 1 heat. She had merely been existing within her natural planetary parameters. Then the medical officer ran a chemical scan on the moisture lingering in her eyes from the dry air, and the room went completely silent. Her resting heart rate is lower than our sleep state baseline, the medical officer whispered, his voice trembling. And her ocular fluid. It is saturated with lysozyme. The concentration is 1,500 times the galactic norm. Her eyes were actively producing a weapon-grade antimicrobial compound simply to stay moist. Vale reviewed the archived footage of her stitching the suit. He isolated the movement of her arm as she wove the needle. The bones in her forearm had crossed over one another, granting a full 180-degree rotational range. It was a structural mechanical advantage that would snap a Corvan limb in half. It was built for leverage. It was built to kill. 47 top-tier cadets had been hospitalized. 47. And she had just asked if the air was always this thick. The Corvan pack leader stared at the human casually wiping her mouth on her sleeve. His heavy dorsal plates began to click against his spine in a rapid, rhythmic sequence. It was a primal distress signal. The first documented instance of the involuntary response in 200 years. As Rhea exhaled a long, slow breath, 3 Corvan administrators instinctively stepped backward from the observation glass. Prey recognized the predator. Her test results were immediately locked behind maximum encryption, far above administrator clearance. The next morning, the Academy drafted a mandatory policy update requiring that no human be left unsupervised during physical evaluations. The primitive steel sewing needle was officially logged into the database as a class of surgical instrument, permanently altering the Academy's medical curriculum. Vale walked down the empty corridor toward the exit. The metal floor plates were still vibrating beneath his heavy boots. For the first time in his career, the vibrations beneath his feet didn't feel like machinery. They felt like a warning. Not about the chamber. Not about the Academy. About humanity. The survival drill had not revealed the limits of a human. It had revealed the limits of everyone else's understanding of what a human truly was. The report filed that evening contained only a single recommendation. Future evaluations involving human cadets must be conducted under revised threat assessment protocols. Standard survival metrics are no longer considered valid. No one argued. No one appealed. After what they had witnessed, there was nothing left to debate. The Academy had designed the perfect survival test. The human had simply treated it like another ordinary Tuesday.